is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. This week on Up Close, I'll be discussing Israel with two members of Knesset alongside the books they've written. Ruth Calderon made her name internationally known when she delivered a Talmud lecture at her inauguration into the Knesset. A PhD in Talmud, Calderon is bringing the lessons of that scholarship to bear on her work in the Knesset, and she's also gaining a further reputation for her work on the Talmud as well. We discuss the Talmud, Israel, and more amid the New English translation of one of her books, A Bride for One Night. And another headline-making member of Knesset is a fellow member of Calderon's in the Yesh Atid party, but coming from near the opposite end of the religious spectrum. The American-born Rabbi Dov Lipman describes himself as ultra-Orthodox, or Haredi in Hebrew, and yet for years now he's described one of his major tasks as bringing the most extreme ultra-Orthodox away from the edge. We discuss his book, To Unify a Nation, My Vision for the Future of Israel. But first, here's my interview with Ruth Calderon. One of the interesting things that you posit in your introduction is that there are a number of opportunities for interpreting these stories that you could have chosen among a number of threads, and that it was hard to settle for any of these stories on one of these threads. So run us through, what is one story where you really felt like this story could go a lot of ways?
There's one that we just studied last night that is a real it was hard for me to try to unfold my concept or my belief or understanding before I go in is that they are wise and there's something, and that they are radical, they're interesting, very interesting people, and that there's something for me to learn there. So there's one story, very short story, I like the short ones, says that the son of Rabbi Akiva, the night of his marriage, what did he do? He told his wife to stand before him and hold the candle, and he was studying Torah all night long.
You mean the son of
Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah.
That's the story. In the morning, Rabbi Akiva comes to him and asks him, so did you find a matzah or motzeh? It's like an understanding between men. Matzah is good, you found her. Matzah isha matzah tov, you found good. Or motzeh, I found her worse than hell. So he says matzah or motzeh, and the son says matzah. I found a good wife. And in my first and second and third reading of it, it doesn't sound very feminist. I mean, he told her, first of all, he doesn't do what a groom is supposed to do in the first night, and it's famous, and we know he doesn't do any of that.
They're supposed to consummate the marriage.
Yes. That's what that's why he cannot say the Shema or not recite the Shema that day. Is free from all his halachic commitments because he has another commitment, and he doesn't do any of that. He studies Torah all night, and he makes her be his lamppost. And because I don't only identify with the women, I identify with the scholar. So I tried to think, what is he trying to do? And then I went into him being the son of Rabbi Akiva, and growing up alone with his mother, and being very close to his mother, and seeing how difficult it is when a scholar leaves for 12 and then another 12 years. And I thought maybe he's trying to rebel and to do something differently to his father, and to invite this young woman to study with him all night, and to say we can consume the marriage tomorrow, but today I want this symbol of the Torah being something that we share. And they stood there all night with a candlelight, learning to know each other slowly.
So for someone who knows relatively little about the Talmud, what do you think is the most surprising story that you've put in there?
The most surprising story is the name of the book, A Bride for One Night. The fact that rabbis used to, and they are not ashamed to write it in the Talmud, they used to go when they traveled, when they were in a faraway city or town, they would ask who would marry them for a night. They would marry a woman, they would be with her for the night or 2 days, and then they would divorce or not and go home. And that is quite a radical concept that I think is worth some thinking.
Right. And you offer what you suggest could be a feminist reading on a lot of these, but you also suggest in the introduction that feminist readings aren't always recoverable. That there's not necessarily a way to read into the text what you want, but you settle with that.
The text is not feminist, and the text is not democratic. It's not, like my father wasn't, and I still love him. The Talmud is a male-dominant, not feminist and not democratic text, And a part of me is also, I can be a feminist, but I don't want to fall into being bitter and angry all the time. It's boring. So I can read it once from the feminist side, and sometimes I do feel like giving them, my thoughts. And sometimes I read it from the scholar point of view, which is much more sensitivity, a sensibility of how to live, rather than you're completely wrong. And that's less interesting.
And now Rabbi Dov Lipman and his efforts to unify a nation. So it seems like a lot of your plan is almost you being a personal missionary to the ultra-Orthodox world on behalf of the Israeli government, on behalf of Yesh Atid policies, on behalf of the idea of establishing education and work as core tenets of Jewish life. Do you have anything beyond you to offer?
Well, I have to be clear that to suggest that it's me that's doing all of these things is really misguiding the viewers in general. You have a full economic ministry led by Naftali Bennett working very hard on Haredi Haredim joining the workforce. You have a ministry of education led by Rabbi Shai Perron, who is working hard daily with ultra-Orthodox schools and getting general studies into those schools. There are so many things happening on a government level. You have a finance minister who okayed hundreds of millions of shekel in the budget for training programs. A Haredi young man who wants to go get trained, we will fund that. That's something which is being done by this government. So you have an army which is going out of its way to create programs for Haredim in the army or in national service. So there are so many much bigger beings and bodies than myself involved. What's helpful is to have someone who's from that background explaining it and sort of being a mouthpiece to explain those things to the ultra-Orthodox community, as opposed to the feeling of it's a complete outsider that's coming in and trying to make changes. And I always talk about my experience in Ner Yisrael, where on the one hand I have rabbinic ordination from the yeshiva and I have a master's in education from Johns Hopkins, and I talk about there are challenges involved for sure, there are difficulties, but let's build our young men to be able to support their families with dignity and fulfill their dreams in whatever professions they choose, but recognize that they don't have to forego on Torah observance or Torah learning. That's the problem right now in the Haredi community. It's one way or the other, and parents tell me they're losing their children in huge numbers. We're going to save that.
And how does that argument work out when you're talking with some of the zealous types in the ultra-Orthodox camp?
Well, one quick story. I was on ultra-Orthodox radio, and they asked me, where do you get it from that guy should leave Kollel studying and go to work? And I quoted Maimonides. Maimonides says, if a person chooses to study Torah and forces other people to support him, he's disgraced God, ashames the Torah, and loses his portion of the world to come. There was a pause on the other side of the microphone, and he says to me, you're quoting Maimonides from like 1,000 years ago? As soon as that happened, I realized that this can work. In terms of people's responses, the moment they realize that you're not trying to make them less religious, and it's really to help leave the cycle of poverty, give your children the opportunity to be true Torah Jews and not forced into a system where all they can do is study Torah, people are open to it. In terms of the zealots, that's more complicated, but the mainstream ultra-Orthodox population, it'll take time, but person by person, group by group, people are hearing it.
Now, one of the things that's interesting about your personal narrative and how you came to this kind of advocacy, as you describe in your book, the idea that it was the treatment of women that really opened your eyes to some of these policies.
Absolutely. The starting point was certainly the extremism and the coercive nature, and I started realizing the shift is happening. Why was it that 20 years ago it was okay to ride on regular buses, and now all of a sudden it's not? Why is it you can have a psak from Moshe Feinstein about riding the New York subway during rush hour, where he says that contact between males and females there is incidental and it's not done out of any kind of love or any kind of lust, and therefore it's okay. Right. And now all of a sudden,
Moshe Feinstein, who's an American rabbi, who deceased in 1984, but he was one of the leading, perhaps the leading Orthodox Jewish legal decisor of the 20th century.
And accepted on both sides of the ocean. And he said that in the 1970s, and then now all of a sudden we're more religious, and I saw where things were heading. I saw how women, yes, again, in extremist situations, but certainly in the streets of Beit Shemesh, it was terrorizing people. There wasn't a one-time incident as people think. It was a regular thing that was happening. And I said, my goodness, where are we heading over here? And then I realized that the isolationism is really what's breeding the extremism. The more isolated you are, the more everyone else out there is the devil and is evil. The moment there's an interface between the ultra-Orthodox community and the secular, which happens in the workforce, it happens almost automatically. The ultra-Orthodox become more moderate and embracing. And also, the secular side realizes that these ultra-Orthodox young men are great guys and value-centered guys. And that's what we need to do to break down those walls.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.